Representative Steve Cohen addresses a critical and disturbing incident in Minneapolis, highlighting how ICE officers' actions reflect a broader crisis of training, oversight, and accountability. Cohen critiques the federal response, exposes false narratives spread by officials, and calls for a thorough state-led investigation. His remarks emphasize that protecting public safety requires adherence to law and respect for due process, not just political talking points.
My friend Mr. Van Drews suggested that Democrats always talk about something other than the bill. Unfortunately, he was wrong when Ms. McBath spoke before I did and started talking about the bill. The bill is somewhat like fiddling while Rome burns. I don't want to suggest we're the Grand Ole Opry, even though that's a wonderful institution. But this is fiddling while Rome burns. And what happened in Minneapolis strikes at the heart of this country, strikes at freedom, opportunity to participate in demonstrations. I guess in a way with their car parked there was a demonstration. It was a disapproval of what the government was doing. That officer put his car in reverse. The lady put her car in reverse after an officer came up to her and tried to grab the door and pull it open and yelled the F word at her and said, "Get that F out of the car." That was not the way to approach her. He approached her in a violent way, and she certainly probably feared for her safety. She went in reverse slowly, then she went forward slowly, and she turned her wheels. And then the man shot her, and shot her. And then when she ran into another car, he walked down there slowly, looked in, walked away like the head of a marching band at a pretty good pace, and walked away. This was all on video. Yet the president said that he was taken to the hospital and was seriously hurt when the car hit him. There's no evidence the car hit him, and he walked like he was an Olympic runner when he came back. He didn't go to the hospital. If he did, it was horse manure. What happened to that woman was unjustified, and that's what I've said. I didn't say it was murder. That's for a jury to decide. It's homicide, but it was unjustified. And for Kristi Noem to have said it was domestic terrorism when she was not on the scene and didn't see anything and was cosplaying, and when the president said it was terrorism and that the officer had been hit with the car and was in the hospital, that was lying to the American public, and that was taking that woman's death without any idea of it giving just not right now, thank you, sir. That was taking away due process and her right to be heard. I taught police law. I was a police attorney. And not only is it part of what Mr. Raskin raised, Walter Bailey was my cohort on the county commission when he took up the case of Garner v. Tennessee. And we talked about that, and police were taught never to shoot at a moving vehicle. That's what I taught them because that was the law. And you couldn't shoot unless you were reasonable fear of death, harm, or great bodily injury to you or someone else. That officer was not in great bodily injury and harm. He put himself in front of the car, and when she drove forward at a slow rate of speed, I don't know what it was very slow, he was on the side. And the other officers had their guns drawn too. So what this committee looks to look at, Mr. Chairman, is we need to look at how these people are trained and what qualifications they have. I've asked at a committee meeting here about 8 months ago for the chairman to ask Ms. Noem about the statement she made, because I'd written her and said, I agree, we need to get murderers, rapists, predators, the worst of the worst, off the streets. But you don't seem to be doing that. That's not who you're arresting. And she hasn't responded. And when she did, it was pablum. And I wrote her a second time, and she gave me more pablum. They're arresting, and they said, I heard on the news today when I got up, rapists, murderers, sexual predators. They're arresting people who are here in the country illegally, which is normally a civil offense and a misdemeanor, but that's who they're stopping. Over 90% of their stops are people who have not had a criminal record whatsoever. And the people in Minneapolis don't want it, and the people in Memphis don't want that, and the people throughout this country think it's wrong. Get the worst of the worst, but don't tell us you're getting the worst of the worst when that's hardly anybody you're getting. You're getting people who contribute to our society in construction, in all different kind of employment, and they're commit crime at a lesser rate than the other folks who are not of their particular class or background. It was awful what happened there. And the woman was killed simply because she was on the scene and she was protesting ICE, and ICE took it as a disrespect to them, and the man shot her and killed her. what the president said was wrong, what Noem said was wrong. An investigation needs to take place, but an investigation by the state of Minnesota. And I feel very comfortable with our colleague, former colleague Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, being in charge of that. I know justice will be sought and wrought, and if there's a conviction, there won't be a pardon. Because if it's federal, it's going to be a pardon like this. And what happened was wrong, and that's what we need to talk about. So, Mr. Chairman, I urge you to have a hearing on what are the qualifications. I've heard they've got people in the ICE troops who have criminal records they don't look at. The advertisements, the last thing before I close, advertisements by ICE on television say, law enforcement officers, if you're not liking the fact that you're held up in your hands, you feel like you're handcuffed by rules and regulations, that you thought you could do something about things when you join the police department, join ICE. The inference is you won't have handcuffs and rules and regulations, and we'll pay you $50,000 as a bonus, and we'll give you general pensions. Join ICE. They're asking people to leave local law enforcement, which is the primary problem in this country, is local law enforcement, and go to work for ICE and have very few restrictions. Make sure they have training. I yield back the balance of my time.
Steve Cohen's remarks provide a scathing indictment of how federal law enforcement, particularly ICE, operates under inadequate oversight and questionable recruitment practices, raising serious concerns about accountability, legality, and the broader consequences for American democracy. The Minneapolis incident he references is not an isolated tragedy, but a stark example of the dangers posed when individuals entrusted with the power of life and death act without proper training, discipline, or clear legal guidance. The woman who was killed posed no immediate threat. Her actions were those of a citizen participating in a form of protest, exercising her rights to demonstrate. Yet she was met with lethal force that the law and sound policing practices would never justify. This incident illustrates a systemic failure in how ICE deploys officers and raises the fundamental question of what it means for public safety when federal officers operate under policies that prioritize aggression and autonomy over measured lawful enforcement. The former police attorney and longtime legislator underscores that officers are trained never to shoot at moving vehicles unless they are in imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, referencing established precedent such as Garner v. Tennessee. This standard exists to protect both officers and the public, ensuring that deadly force is applied only as a last resort. The officer involved in the Minneapolis shooting clearly failed to meet this standard. He engaged in a confrontation that escalated unnecessarily, and the aftermath demonstrates how the misuse of authority can lead to fatal outcomes. Claims from political leaders portraying the incident as terrorism or exaggerating injury are factually inaccurate and obscure accountability, denying justice to the victim. These misrepresentations erode public trust and highlight the urgent need for transparency and rigorous investigation. Cohen critiques the broader structure of ICE recruitment and operational culture, which encourages local law enforcement officers to leave established departments for federal work with fewer restrictions and oversight. By offering financial bonuses and generalized benefits, these programs entice officers who may not meet rigorous qualifications, undermining the quality of law enforcement personnel and putting civilians at risk. When officers with insufficient training, poor supervision, or criminal records are placed in positions of authority, the potential for abuse of power escalates dramatically. This creates fear and distrust, particularly among communities already skeptical of federal enforcement agencies. Cohen also exposes the disconnect between ICE's stated objectives and operational reality. Officials often claim they are targeting the worst of the worst, yet the majority of stops involve individuals without criminal records or with minor civil offenses. Misaligning enforcement with the stated mission generates fear, wastes resources, and erodes public confidence in law enforcement. Cohen's insistence on a state-led investigation, led by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, reflects his belief in accountability rooted in due process and professional standards rather than political expediency. Justice must be served transparently, and federal pardons should not shield misconduct from consequence. This incident is a clear reminder that law enforcement carries immense responsibility, and agencies like ICE must operate with proper oversight, training, and adherence to legal standards. Misuse of authority and misleading political narratives compromise safety and justice. Cohen's testimony emphasizes that public trust, democratic legitimacy, and the rule of law depend on strict adherence to accountability and competence. Policies, recruitment, and operational practices must reflect these standards to prevent future tragedies and ensure the safety of all citizens.